My captain handed me the file with a smile that said I was already dead. The target, King Rowan, the most feared alpha in the state. No officer had ever walked into the den and come out with their badge or their life intact. I walked in expecting a bloodbath, but when I pointed my gun at the king of beasts, he didn't attack. He smiled, held out his wrists, and whispered, "What took you so long, officer?" Chapter 1. Nyra stared at the mirror in the precinct locker room, and for a split second, her own reflection looked like a stranger. Her skin was too pale, and her eyes seemed to glow with a light that shouldn't be there. She squeezed the edges of the sink until the porcelain groaned under her grip. Why did she feel like she was vibrating? It was a low hum, deep in her bones, that had been getting louder ever since she turned 24. She reached for her locker and pulled out her uniform. The fabric was crisp and the badge was heavy. She pinned it over her heart because she needed to believe the law was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Her partner, a veteran named Miller, walked in and leaned against the door. He had a look on his face that made Nyra's stomach turn. It was a mix of pity and something much darker. He held a manila folder in his hand like it was a death sentence. "Vance," he said. His voice was like gravel. "The captain has a special assignment for the top of the class. A real hero maker." Nyra took the folder. She opened it and saw the face of a man who looked like he belonged on a throne, not a mugshot. Rowan. The name felt like a punch to her ribs. He was the alpha of the Shadow Pack, a king of beasts. The warrant was 10 years old. It was for racketeering and assault, but everyone knew the real crime was that he existed outside the law. "You want me to go to the den?" Nyra asked. Her voice trembled, but she cleared her throat to hide it. "Not just go there," Miller laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "You're going to arrest him. Bring him back in cuffs or don't come back at all." Nyra felt the tremor in her blood spike. She knew this was a suicide mission. Even so, she nodded. She tucked the folder under her arm and walked past him. She didn't know what scared her more, the king she had to hunt, or the fact that she was actually excited to go into the woods. She walked to her patrol car and sat inside. The smell of cheap upholstery and old coffee usually calmed her. Instead, she felt like the car was a cage. The drive felt like a descent into another world. The city lights faded behind her, replaced by the tall, black shadows of the pines. The air grew colder. It smelled of wet earth and something ancient. Her heart skipped when she saw the neon sign for a club buried deep in the forest. The Den. It was a place where humans didn't go, unless they wanted to disappear. She checked her service weapon, one in the chamber. She checked her cuffs, silver-plated. A surge of energy so bright it made her teeth ache hit her. She stepped out of the car and the forest went silent. The world narrowed. She could only see the door of the club. She was a cop. She had a warrant. And she was going to bring the king to his knees because if she didn't, the wildness inside her would finally break free. She straightened her tie and walked toward the entrance. She didn't look back. She felt like she was finally going home.
Rowan sat on the velvet sofa of his private balcony, looking down at the chaos of the fight club below, and felt nothing but a crushing weight of boredom. The air was thick with the scent of cheap beer, sweat, and the copper tang of blood. Two wolves were brawling in the pit, tearing at each other with a mindless fury that made Rowan want to yawn. He was the king of the Shadow Pack. He had everything a man or wolf could want. Yet, the fire in his soul had gone out years ago. He took a sip of amber liquid from a crystal glass, his golden eyes scanning the crowd for anything that didn't look like a disappointment. The wind shifted. A new scent drifted through the vents. It was sharp, clean, and smelled like wildflowers blooming in the middle of a thunderstorm. Rowan's hand froze. His wolf, a massive, shadowy beast that usually slept in the back of his mind, suddenly stood up and paced. "What is that?" he whispered. His voice was a low rumble that made the glass in his hand shiver. His second in command, Caleb, stepped out of the shadows. Caleb looked worried. He was always worried. "A human," Caleb said. "A girl in a police uniform. She's at the front door. Rowan. She's telling the guards she has a warrant for your arrest." Rowan's lips curled into a slow, dangerous smile. A cop? In his territory? Not only that, but a girl who smelled like lightning and soft petals. He stood up, his massive frame unfolding, stretching until his joints popped. He was 6'5" of pure, lethal muscle, and he hadn't had a real challenge in a decade. "Let her in," Rowan commanded. "In fact, tell the guards to stay back. I want to see how far she gets before she realizes she's walked into a lion's mouth." Caleb hesitated. "She's carrying silver, Rowan. I can smell it." "Good," Rowan replied. "I hope she knows how to use it." He walked to the edge of the balcony and watched the entrance. He saw her. She was tiny compared to the giants in the room, but she walked like she owned the floor. Her uniform was perfect. Her badge glittered under the strobe lights. She looked like a doll made of steel. Rowan felt a thrum of power in his chest, a bond he hadn't felt in a lifetime, reaching out toward her. Obeying an instinct he couldn't name, she looked up. Her eyes locked onto his. Rowan felt his heart hammer against his ribs, because her eyes weren't just human. There was a shimmer in them, a silver spark that shouldn't exist in a girl with a badge. He didn't know who she was, but he knew he wasn't going to let her leave. She started up the stairs toward his private lounge. Rowan drained his glass and set it down. He leaned against the railing, waiting, as the air thickened with her scent. She was coming to arrest him, and for the first time in 100 years, Rowan felt like he was finally awake.
Nyra pushed through the heavy curtains of the VIP lounge, and the silence that followed was louder than the music downstairs. The room was draped in dark red silk and smelled of expensive wood and Rowan. He was leaning against a railing, looking at her like she was a dessert he hadn't decided to eat yet. Her body moved on instinct, leveling her Glock 17 at his broad chest. "Rowan, Alpha of the Shadow Pack," she said. Her voice didn't shake this time. "You are under arrest. Put your hands where I can see them." Rowan didn't move. He just stared at her, his golden eyes glowing with a heat that made the space between them burn. "You're a long way from the precinct, officer," he said. His voice was a velvet growl. "Do you even know what you're doing here?" "I'm serving a warrant," Nyra snapped. "Don't make me use this." Rowan took a step forward. He didn't look afraid of the gun. In fact, he looked amused. "I've been waiting for someone like you, someone with a bit of bite." In a blur of motion, he was right in front of her. He was so fast. He didn't grab her gun. Instead, he reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was like a brand, searing her skin. Nyra's breath caught. The current in her blood turned into a roar. She felt her wolf stir deep inside, reaching for him, answering the call of a king. "You're not like the others," Rowan whispered. He leaned down, his nose brushing her temple. "You smell like the moon, Nyra." "How do you know my name?" she gasped. She tried to step back, but her feet felt like they were rooted to the floor. "I know everything I need to know," he replied. He turned around and held out his wrists. "Take me in, officer. I'm bored of this place anyway. But my car is in the shop. We'll have to take yours." Nyra blinked. She was in shock. He was actually surrendering? She reached for her silver cuffs, her fingers fumbling with the latch. The moment the metal touched his skin, a spark flew, bright and blue. Rowan didn't even flinch. He just laughed, a dark, sexy sound that made Nyra's chest ache. She clicked the cuffs shut. He was technically her prisoner, but as he walked toward the door, she felt like she was the one being led. They walked out of the club and toward her patrol car. The air was cold, but she felt like she was on fire. She opened the back door for him. He looked at the tiny back seat and then at her, smirking. "It's going to be a long drive, Nyra," he said. "I hope you brought snacks." Silence stretched. heavy and physical. She got into the driver's seat and started the engine. Rowan was in the back, his knees hitting the partition, looking at her through the rearview mirror. She felt the beginning of something that was going to destroy her life etched in fire. She put the car in gear and drove away from the den. She didn't know it yet, but the warrant was the least of her problems.
Rowan leaned his head against the cold glass of the patrol car window, watching the trees blur past, and fought the urge to rip the partition out with his bare teeth. The car was too small. The scent of Nyra was too strong. It was everywhere, filling the cabin, suffocating him with a sweetness that made his instincts surge. He looked at the back of her head. Her hair was pulled into a tight, professional bun, but he could see the fine, silver hairs at the nape of her neck. "You're driving too fast," Rowan said, his voice resonating through the seat. "Are you afraid I'm going to jump out? Or are you afraid of what happens if we stay in this car too long?" Nyra's eyes flicked to the mirror. "Keep your mouth shut, Rowan. You're a prisoner, not a passenger." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Rowan asked. He leaned forward, as far as the cuffs would allow, his face inches from the mesh screen. "You can feel it, can't you? The pull. Your blood is screaming for me, Nyra. It has been since the moment I touched you." She couldn't hide the way her hands tightened on the wheel. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a police officer. You're a criminal." "You're a liar," Rowan growled. "You're wearing that uniform like a mask, but underneath it, you're just like me. Maybe even more dangerous." She slammed on the brakes. The car skidded on the gravel, coming to a halt in the middle of the dark road. She turned around, her face flushed, her eyes shimmering with that strange, metallic light. "I am nothing like you," she screamed. Rowan didn't back down. He stared into her soul, letting his own wolf look through his eyes. "Then why is your scent changing? Why do you smell like a mate?" Silence roared between them. Nyra looked like she was going to cry, or kill him. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I am taking you to the precinct. That is the only thing that matters." "We'll see," Rowan whispered. "Before we reach the city, you'll be begging me to break these chains." She didn't answer. She just turned back around and kept driving, but Rowan could see her chest heaving. He could hear her heart racing. He settled back into the seat, a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. He didn't care about the warrant or the jail cell. He only cared about the girl in the front seat. She was the Silver Wolf, the legend his pack had been hunting for generations, and she was currently driving him right into the heart of a war. He smiled. This was the most fun he'd had in a century. The car moved deeper into the night, the headlights cutting through the fog like a blade. Rowan closed his eyes and inhaled. She was his. She just didn't know it yet.
Nyra pulled the cruiser into the gravel lot of a diner that looked like it had been dying since the 80s. The neon sign buzzed, a harsh, flickering red that made her headache throb. She killed the engine, but the silence didn't bring relief. It only made the presence of the man in the back seat louder. Rowan. He was too big for the car, too big for her life, and definitely too big for the diner booth they were about to squeeze into. "I need food," Rowan announced from the back. His voice was deep, rumbling through the partition like a bass drum. "And since you have me trussed up like a turkey, officer, you're going to have to help me with the logistics." Nyra sighed. She stepped out into the cold night air, the wind biting at her cheeks. She opened his door and hauled him out. He stood over her, blocking out the moon. He smelled like rain and trouble. She led him inside, ignoring the stares of the few truckers nursing lukewarm coffee. They slid into a booth at the back. The vinyl squeaked under his weight. "Order me a burger," he said, nodding at the menu with his chin. "Rare, and fries, lots of them," she ordered. When the food arrived, grease glistening under the yellow lights, the problem became obvious. His hands were cuffed behind his back. He couldn't eat. He looked at the burger, then at her, his golden eyes dancing with amusement. "Well?" he asked. "I'm waiting." Nyra's face heated up. "You have got to be kidding me." "I have rights," Nyra, he purred. Prisoners have to be fed. Unless you want to unleash me? She wasn't going to unleash him. She wasn't going to let him win. She picked up a French fry. Her hand trembled slightly as she held it to his lips. He leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. His lips brushed her fingers, hot and rough. A jolt of electricity shot up her arm, bypassing her brain and hitting her heart. She snatched her hand back as if she'd touched a live wire. "You're enjoying this," she whispered. "Immensely," he replied. He opened his mouth for another one. As she fed him, the air thickened. It wasn't just a meal, it was intimate. It was wrong. A chair scraped against the floor. 3 bikers from the counter stood up. They were big, drunk, and looking right at Nyra. "Hey, sugar," one of them slurred, waddling over. "Why don't you ditch the prisoner and come play with some real men?" Nyra's hand went to her belt. Rowan shifted. He didn't stand up. He didn't yell. Instead, a sound came out of his chest, a low, guttural growl that rattled the silverware on the table. It was a sound so primal, so terrifying, that the windows shook in their frames. The biker stopped dead. His face went pale. "I suggest you walk away," Rowan said softly, "before I decide to eat something other than this burger." The bikers didn't wait. They scrambled out the door, leaving their money on the counter. Nyra looked at Rowan. He was smiling, his teeth sharp and white. "Stop intimidating the civilians," she hissed, though her heart was racing with something that felt dangerously like admiration. "I was just clearing my throat, officer," he teased. "Now, how about some ketchup?" Nyra grabbed a napkin and wiped his mouth, her fingers lingering for a second too long on his jawline. She felt the stubble. She felt the heat. She realized she wasn't guarding a prisoner. She was sitting across from a force of nature. And God help her, she didn't want to leave.
Rowan sat sideways in the back seat, his long legs cramped against the door, watching Nyra unravel. It was a fascinating process. She was driving like a woman possessed, her eyes glued to the road, her knuckles white on the wheel. The speedometer climbed higher, 80, 90. She was running, not from the rogues but from him, from the tension that had filled the car since the diner. He decided to poke the bear. "You know," he drawled, leaning his head against the partition mesh, "for a woman obsessed with the law, you break a lot of traffic violations." Nyra flinched. "I am transporting a high-value target. Speed is necessary." "Is it?" Rowan chuckled. "Or are you just trying to get away from the fact that you liked touching me back there?" The car swerved. Just a little, but it was enough to tell him he'd hit a nerve. "Shut up, Rowan," she snapped. Her voice was tight, pitched high with panic. "Make me," he challenged. The sirens wailed, not from outside, but from her own dashboard. She had hit the lights. She pulled the cruiser over to the shoulder, tires crunching on gravel, dust billowing up around them. Rowan watched, confused. There was no one around. The road was empty. The forest was silent. "What are you doing?" he asked. Nyra ignored him. She ripped her ticket book out of the glove compartment. She grabbed a pen. Her hand was shaking, but she forced it to be steady. She started writing. Name, Nyra Vance. Offense, speeding. Fine, $250. Rowan stared. He blinked. Then, he started to laugh. A deep, belly laugh that shook the whole car. "You have got to be kidding me," he wheezed. "You're giving yourself a ticket?" "I broke the law," Nyra muttered, tearing the slip off with a vicious rip. She tucked it under the visor. "The law applies to everyone, even me." Rowan stopped laughing. He looked at her, really looked at her. She sat there, chest heaving, trying to breathe through the panic. She was using the rules to hold herself together. She was terrified of the chaos inside her, the wildness he could smell rolling off her skin in waves. She thought the badge made her safe. "You're not a cop." "Nyra," he said softly. His voice lost its mocking edge. You're a cage, and you're terrified that if you open the door, even for a second, you'll never be able to close it again. She didn't look at him. She just gripped the wheel until her fingers turned red. Drive the car, she whispered. Just let me drive. Fine, Rowan said. He leaned back, closing his eyes. Drive. But you can't outrun what's in your blood. Eventually, officer, you're going to have to crash.
Nyra drove until her eyes burned. The road had turned into a narrow ribbon of asphalt winding through the mountains. The trees here were different. Taller, thicker, pressing in on the road like the bars of a cell. The radio had died an hour ago. Nothing but static. She was alone in the dark with the king of wolves, and the ticket tucked in her visor felt like a flimsy shield. She checked the rearview mirror. Rowan was asleep, or pretending to be. His head was tipped back, exposing the strong line of his throat. He looked peaceful, human, but she knew better. She had seen the way he growled at the diner. She had felt the power rolling off him like heat from a furnace. Her ears popped. The frequency in her bones, the one she had been ignoring for years, spiked. It wasn't a hum anymore. It was a scream. Run. The instinct hit her so hard, she almost swerved into the guardrail. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What was that? It wasn't a thought. It was a command. Rowan, she said. Her voice sounded small in the quiet car. He didn't move, but his eyes snapped open. They were wide, alert. I hear them. Hear who? Nyra asked. She looked at the GPS. No signal. Turn off the lights, he ordered. His voice was hard, cold steel. I can't drive in the dark. Turn them off, Nyra, now. She killed the headlights. The world plunged into absolute darkness. The car coasted forward, blind. Nyra held her breath. She gripped the wheel, waiting. Then she saw it. In the distance, high on the ridge to their left, a pair of eyes glowed in the moonlight. Then another pair, then a dozen. They weren't animals. They were too big. They were moving in a pack, keeping pace with the car, running through the trees with impossible speed. Rogues, Rowan growled. They've been tracking your scent for miles. Fear, cold and sharp, sliced through Nyra's chest. My scent? They want me? They want the silver wolf, Rowan said. He sat up, straining against his cuffs. And right now, that's you. Before she could ask what he meant, something slammed into the side of the cruiser. Metal screamed, glass shattered. The car spun out of control, careening toward the edge of the embankment. Nyra screamed, but the sound was lost in the roar of the engine. The world tilted. She saw Rowan. He wasn't trying to save himself. He was throwing his body against the partition, trying to shield her from the impact. The car went over the edge. They were falling into the dark, and for the first time in her life, Nyra didn't reach for her badge. She reached for him.
Rowan woke to the taste of copper and the smell of burning rubber. The world was upside down. The patrol car was a crumpled tin can wrapped around an ancient oak tree at the bottom of the ravine. Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the hiss of a cracked radiator. Nyra? His voice was a rough croak. He looked to his left. Nyra was slumped against the shattered window. A line of dark blood ran from her hairline down her pale cheek. She wasn't moving. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at Rowan's chest. Not the calculated worry of a king, but the raw terror of a mate. She can't be dead. He tried to reach for her, but the silver cuffs bit into his wrists. They were holding him back. Enough, he snarled. Rowan pulled his arms apart. He didn't use a key. He used the brute force of an alpha. The steel snapped like a dry twig, the metal screeching as the links gave way. He was free. He had been free the whole time. He kicked the passenger door open, sending it flying into the darkness with a metallic crash. He crawled over the center console, ignoring the glass slicing into his palms. He touched her neck. A pulse. It was erratic, fluttering like a trapped bird, but it was there. Relief washed over him so strong it nearly brought him to his knees. "Come on, little wolf," he whispered. He slid his arms under her. She was impossibly small, as if she weighed nothing. He pulled her out of the wreckage and into the cold night air. The forest was freezing. Snow was starting to fall, dusting her dark uniform with white. He knew they couldn't stay here. The rogues would be down the embankment in minutes. He looked at the car, her shield, now a smoking ruin. Then he looked at her. Her badge was bent, hanging off her pocket by a single thread. The law was dead. The rules were gone. A shift settled in his soul. He pulled her flush against his chest, sharing his heat. He wasn't her prisoner anymore. He was her only chance. He turned his back on the wreck and started climbing into the deep woods. The game was over. The hunt had begun.
Pain was the first thing Nyra felt. It was a hot, throbbing ache in her left leg that radiated up to her hip. She groaned, trying to open her eyes. The world was spinning. She wasn't in the car. She was moving. No, she was being carried. "Stay still," a deep voice rumbled against her ear. "You're bleeding." Nyra blinked, her vision blurry. She saw a jawline covered in dark stubble. She saw golden eyes looking forward, scanning the darkness. Rowan. Memory crashed into her. The lights, the impact, the fall. She gasped and tried to push away from him, but her arms felt like lead. "Put me down," she wheezed. "I have to. Call it in. The radio." "The radio is toast, Nyra," Rowan said. He didn't stop walking. His stride was long and smooth, eating up the ground. "The car is gone, and if you don't stop wiggling, I'm going to drop you in a snowbank." "I am a police officer," she insisted, though her voice lacked its usual steel. "You are under arrest." Rowan let out a short, dry laugh. "Look at your wrists, officer." Nyra looked down. Her hands were empty. Her gun was gone. Then she looked at his wrists. The cuffs were gone, broken pieces of silver hanging from his jacket cuffs like jewelry. Her world tilted. He had broken them. He could have killed her at any moment. He could have run. He was carrying her through a freezing forest, shielding her from the wind with his own body. "Why?" she whispered. "Why didn't you leave me?" He stopped. The forest held its breath. Rowan looked down at her, and for a second, the golden fire in his eyes dimmed into something softer. Something that looked terrifyingly like care. "Because you're terrible at directions," he said. "You'd get lost in 5 minutes." It was a lie. She knew it. He knew it. But then, he tightened his grip on her. "Quiet," he hissed. Nyra stiffened. She heard it too. The snap of a twig, the huff of breath that wasn't human. "They're here," Rowan murmured. "Hold on tight, Nyra. And for God's sake, bury your face in my neck. Hide your scent." She obeyed. She buried her face in the crook of his neck. He smelled of pine and power. She closed her eyes. She was the law, but right now, he was the only law that mattered.
Rowan moved with the silence of a ghost. He could hear the rogues, 3 of them, fan out in a search pattern 50 yards to the east. They were sloppy, loud, and smelling of rot, but they were dangerous. If they found Nyra in this state, they would tear her apart. He found a hollow beneath the roots of a massive fallen cedar. It was tight, dark, and smelled of damp earth. He slid inside, pulling Nyra in with him. "Don't make a sound," he breathed against her hair. The space was so small they were forced to tangle together. Nyra's back was pressed against the dirt, and Rowan hovered over her, his body forming a protective cage. Her legs were between his chest brushed hers with every breath. The air shifted. The adrenaline of the chase mixed with something else. Desire. It was thick and heavy. He could feel her heart hammering against his sternum. He could smell the sharp tang of her fear. But underneath it, The sweet, cloying scent of wildflowers was getting stronger. "Rowan," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "My leg. It hurts." "I know," he murmured. "Focus on me. Look at me." She looked up. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated. In the shadows, the silver flecks in her irises seemed to swirl like liquid mercury. She wasn't just injured. The trauma was triggering her. The silver wolf was trying to heal her, but her human body was fighting the change. "You're burning up," he said, brushing a thumb across her cheek. Her skin was scorching. "I feel weird," she stammered, "like I'm shaking apart." "It's the adrenaline," he lied. He couldn't tell her yet. Not while they were hunted. A heavy paw stepped onto the log above them. Dust drifted down onto Rowan's shoulder. A low snarl echoed from outside. The rogue was right on top of them. Nyra gasped. Rowan crushed his mouth to hers. It wasn't a kiss of romance. It was a tactical move to silence her breath, to mask her scent with his own. But the moment their lips touched, it became something else. Her mouth was soft, tasting of shock and rain. She stiffened for a second, then melted. Her hands grabbed the lapels of his jacket. Rowan felt a roar build in his throat. He poured his dominance into the kiss, claiming her, marking her, mine. Above them, the rogue sniffed the air. It whined, confused by the overwhelming scent of an alpha male, and moved on. Rowan pulled back, inches from her face. They were both panting. Nyra stared at him, her lips swollen, her eyes dazed. "They're gone," he rasped. "You..." She started, then stopped. She touched her lips. "Strategy," Rowan said, though his voice was wrecked. "Purely strategy." But as he looked at her, he knew he was in trouble. That wasn't strategy. That was the beginning of the end of his control.
The trek became a blurred nightmare of snow and pain. Nyra walked, or rather dragged herself through the dense underbrush. Her left leg felt like it was on fire, not the normal burn of a muscle strain, but a deep, searing heat that made her teeth chatter. Every step was a battle. She leaned heavily on Rowan. His arm was wrapped around her waist like a steel band, holding her up when her knees buckled. "We need to stop," she gasped. Her breath came out in white puffs that vanished in the dark. "Not yet," Rowan urged. His voice was grim. "They're tracking us. Nyra, if we stop, we die." Still, she couldn't keep going. Her vision swam. The trees looked like they were bending toward her, whispering things she couldn't understand. She looked at Rowan. His jaw was set in a hard line, his golden eyes scanning the shadows. He looked like a king leading an army of one. "Why?" she started, her voice trembling. "Why did you kiss me?" Rowan didn't look at her. He just tightened his grip. "I told you, it was strategy." But then, Nyra stumbled. Her bad leg gave out. She pitched forward, expecting the cold bite of the snow. Instead, Rowan caught her. He scooped her up into his arms again, effortlessly, as if she were made of air. "You're burning up," he growled. He pressed his cheek against her forehead. "You're hotter than a furnace." "I'm fine," she lied. "Put me down." "No," he said. "You're not fine. You smell like change." Nyra didn't know what that meant. All she knew was that the pressure inside her was tearing her apart. It felt like her skin was too tight for her body. She rested her head against his chest. She could hear his heart, a slow, powerful rhythm that calmed the chaos in her own blood. She let her guard down, just for a second. She closed her eyes and inhaled his scent. Pine, rain, and something wild. It was the only thing anchoring her to the world. "Rowan," she whispered, "I don't think I can make it to the precinct." "Forget the precinct," he said roughly. "We just need to make it to the river." She stopped fighting him. She let herself be carried. But deep down, she knew the fever wasn't from the cold. It was from the kiss. It had unlocked something. and she wasn't sure if she was dying or if she was finally waking up.
Rowan found a small cave near the ridgeline, sheltered from the biting wind. He laid Nyra down on a bed of dry pine needles. She was shivering violently now. Her face was pale, but her cheeks were flushed with a dangerous red heat. "Nyra," he said softly, "open your eyes." She groaned, thrashing slightly. "It hurts. Everything hurts." Rowan reached for her injured leg. He ripped the fabric of her uniform pants to inspect the wound. What he saw made his blood run cold. It wasn't a normal cut. There was a shard of metal embedded deep in her calf from the car wreck. But the wound wasn't bleeding red. It was bubbling with a strange, silvery liquid. The skin around it was glowing. "Silver," he hissed. "The car door. It had silver plating in the frame. For a human, silver was just metal. But for a wolf, it was poison. And for Nyra, it was acting like a catalyst. Her body was fighting the metal, but her dormant wolf blood was reacting to it, trying to push the change to heal her. Rowan realized the truth. She wasn't just a carrier of the gene. She was the gene. The silver wolf wasn't a myth. She was lying right in front of him, dying because her human side was fighting the transition. "I have to get it out," he told her. He shrugged off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. "No," she whimpered. "Don't touch it." "I have to. Nyra, trust me." She stopped thrashing. She looked up at him, her eyes glassy. "I trust you," she whispered. Those 3 words hit Rowan harder than a bullet. He took a deep breath. He gripped her leg with one hand and used his claws, sharp as scalpels, to dig for the shard. Nyra screamed. It was a raw, animalistic sound that tore through the night. Rowan worked fast. He found the metal and yanked it out. He threw the bloody shard into the snow. Then, without hesitation, he brought his wrist to his mouth. He bit down hard until his own blood welled up. He pressed his bleeding wrist against her wound. "Take it," he commanded. "Heal." Alpha blood could heal almost anything. He watched as his dark red blood mixed with her silver wound. Steam rose from her leg. The skin began to knit together, knitting with impossible speed. Nyra's breathing evened out. The fever broke, sweat glistening on her forehead. Rowan sat back, exhausted. He looked at her. She was safe. For now. But the scent of her blood was now in the air. Stronger than ever. The rogues would smell it. The whole forest would smell it. He didn't move. He sat guard over her, his golden eyes glowing in the dark. He had saved her life. But in doing so, he had confirmed her destiny. She was the queen, and he was the only thing standing between her and a world that wanted to devour her.
Nyra woke up to the sound of rushing water. Her head was clear, alarmingly clear. The pain in her leg was gone. In fact, it felt stronger than it had before. She sat up, blinking in the pre-dawn light. Rowan was standing at the mouth of the cave. His back was to her. He was tense, his muscles coiled like springs. "Rowan?" she asked. Her voice didn't sound like her own. It was deeper, husky. He turned. His expression was unreadable. "We have to move. Now." "Why? What's wrong?" "They found us," he said simply. A howl ripped through the air. It was close. Too close. Nyra scrambled to her feet. She looked down at her leg. The wound was gone, replaced by a faint silver scar. She stared at it, shocked. "How did you—" "Later!" Rowan cut her off. He grabbed her hand. "Run!" Her body moved on instinct, sprinting out of the cave. The forest was a blur. The ground sloped downward, toward the roar of the river. Nyra ran faster than she had ever run in her life. She didn't stumble. She didn't get winded. She felt powerful. Shadows detached themselves from the trees. 4 massive wolves, rogues, stepped onto the path ahead of them. They were mangy, scarred, and drooling with hunger. They blocked the way to the river. Rowan skidded to a stop, pulling Nyra behind him. "Stay behind me," he ordered. His voice was a low growl. There are too many of them, Nyra whispered. She reached for her hip, forgetting her gun was gone. I don't care, Rowan said. He started to unbutton his shirt. I'm not letting them touch you. What are you doing? I'm evening the odds, he said. More wolves appeared behind them. They were surrounded. The river raged below, 100-foot drop off the cliff to their right. Rowan looked at her. For a second, the alpha mask slipped. He looked just like a man who was about to lose everything. Nyra, he said, if I fall, you jump. You understand me? You jump into the river. I'm not leaving you, she said. The words came out before she could stop them. You have to, he said. Rowan threw his head back and roared. It wasn't a human sound. His body cracked, bones shifting, muscles expanding. He fell forward, and where a man had stood, a gargantuan black wolf now rose. He was massive, a nightmare made of fur and shadow. He turned his golden eyes to her one last time. Go. Then he launched himself at the rogues. Nyra watched, frozen. She should run. She should jump. But as the first rogue slammed into Rowan, she felt a rage explode in her chest. It was hot. It was blinding. And it whispered a single word. Fight. The cliffside was a slaughterhouse. Nyra stood with her back to the drop, the roar of the river below drowned out by the wet, tearing sound of teeth meeting flesh. Rowan was a blur of shadow. He moved with a violence that should have terrified her. He was a monster, a gargantuan black wolf that snapped spines like dry twigs. Yet, as she watched him tear the throat out of a rogue the size of a bear, she didn't feel fear. She felt awe. A rogue broke away from the pack. It had realized the alpha was distracted. It locked its yellow eyes on Nyra, drool dripping from its jowls, and charged. Run! Her brain screamed. Fight! Her blood roared. Nyra didn't jump. She didn't retreat. She grabbed a jagged branch from the ground, wielding it like a nightstick. The wolf lunged, aiming for her throat. Get back! She screamed. Time stood still. The energy in her chest exploded. She swung the branch. It shouldn't have been fast enough. She was human. He was supernatural. But her arm moved with a speed that blurred the air. The wood connected with the wolf's snout with a sickening crack. The force of the blow sent the 400-pound beast skidding sideways into the dirt. The rogue shook its head, stunned. It looked at her, confused. Nyra looked at her own hands. They were trembling, but her veins were glowing. A faint silver network of light pulsed under her skin. I said, get back, she growled. Her voice dropped an octave, resonating with a command that wasn't learned at the police academy. The rogue whined. It took a step back. Rowan was there. He didn't just kill the rogue, he annihilated it. He landed on its back, a mountain of fur and fury, and ended the threat with one snap of his jaws. Silence fell over the clearing. The snow was stained red. Rowan stood over the bodies of 4 wolves, his chest heaving, his muzzle slick with blood. He turned slowly to face her. He was terrifying, a predator that could kill her with a swipe. But as their eyes locked, the golden fire in his gaze softened. He lowered his massive head, not in submission, but in recognition. Nyra dropped the branch. Her legs felt like jelly. She walked toward him. She should be arresting him. She should be calling for backup. Instead, she reached out. She buried her fingers in the thick ruff of his neck. The fur was coarse and warm. You're real, she whispered. He leaned into her touch, a low rumble starting in his chest that shook her ribs. She was standing on a cliff edge with a killer, and she had never felt safer.
Rowan felt the shift take him. It was always painful, bones cracking and reforming, skin stretching back into human shape. He fell to his knees in the snow, naked, bruised and bleeding from a dozen bites. The cold air bit at his skin, but the adrenaline was still pumping hot and fast through his veins. He looked up, expecting to see Nyra running. Any sane human would have run. He had just slaughtered a pack in front of her. He was covered in blood. He was a monster. But Nyra wasn't running. She was standing there, arms crossed over her chest, her uniform torn and dirty, looking at him with an expression he couldn't place. It wasn't fear. It was annoyance. "You ruined your shirt," she said flatly. Rowan blinked. He let out a rough, dry laugh that turned into a cough. "I just saved your life, Nyra, and you're worried about my fashion choices? You're naked," she pointed out, averting her eyes, though a blush crept up her neck that smelled delicious. "And you're a flight risk." "I'm a what?" "A flight risk." She reached into her back pocket. She pulled out her spare set of cuffs. "Turn around, Rowan." He stared at her. She was serious. She had seen him as a wolf, seen the violence he was capable of, and she still thought a pair of handcuffs could hold him. It was the most ridiculous, stubborn, arousing thing he had ever seen. "You really are a piece of work," he muttered, shaking his head. He stood up. He turned around and put his hands behind his back. He felt the cold metal click against his wrists. It was a joke. He could break them in a heartbeat. But he didn't. He let her have this. He let her think she was in control, because it was the only way she could process the madness of the night. "The car is gone," she said, her voice shaking slightly as she tightened the ratchet. "But the warrant isn't. Start walking." "Rowan." Rowan smirked. "You like saying my name," he teased, glancing over his shoulder. "Shut up," she snapped. But she stepped closer to him. She grabbed his arm, ostensibly to guide him, but he felt her lean her weight against him. She was exhausted, she was hurt, and she was clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in the world. "Where are we going, officer?" he asked softly. "There's a highway 2 miles east," she said. "We're catching a bus." "A bus," Rowan repeated. "The king of the Shadow Pack, on a Greyhound." "If you behave," she said, "I might even buy you a ticket." Rowan started walking. He didn't care about the bus. He didn't care about the rogues. He walked because she asked him to, and for the first time in his life, the chains didn't feel like a prison. They felt like a promise.
The bus station was a desolate concrete block in the middle of nowhere. It smelled of diesel and stale cigarettes. They were the only 2 people waiting. Nyra had managed to borrow some clothes from a lost-and-found bin for Rowan, a flannel shirt that was too tight across his shoulders and a pair of sweatpants. He looked ridiculous. He looked breathtaking. When the bus finally wheezed to a halt, they climbed on. It was nearly empty. Nyra steered him to the back row. She sat next to him, keeping her hand on the chain connecting his wrists, maintaining the illusion of custody. "You look like hell, officer," Rowan murmured. "I feel like hell," she admitted. The adrenaline was crashing. Her body felt heavy, like her bones were made of lead. The tremor inside her had settled into a dull, constant ache. The bus lurched forward, humming along the dark highway. Nyra tried to stay awake. She stared at the window, watching her own reflection. Who was she? She had fought a wolf with a stick. She had glowed. She was transporting a man she should be terrified of, but all she wanted to do was curl up in his lap. Her head started to bob. Her eyelids felt like sandpaper. "Sleep, Nyra," Rowan's voice came from the dark, low and hypnotic. "I'm not going anywhere." "Can't," she mumbled. "Duty." "Screw duty," he said. "I'll wake you if we get robbed." She let out a soft snort. Her head dipped again. This time, it didn't snap back up. It landed on something hard and warm. Rowan's shoulder. She expected him to shove her off. She felt him shift. He lowered his shoulder slightly, making a pillow for her. He stayed perfectly still. The scent of him, soap and pine, wrapped around her like a blanket. She surrendered. She let the darkness take her. She fell into a dreamless sleep, deep and restorative. When she snapped awake an hour later, disoriented and drooling, she jumped up like she'd been burned. "I wasn't," she stammered, wiping her mouth. "I was just resting my eyes." Rowan was watching her. He was leaning back, his legs stretched out into the aisle. He looked amused, but his eyes were soft. "You drool when you sleep, officer," he smirked. "It's a very responsible look." Nyra flushed bright red. She checked her gun, which wasn't there. She checked the cuffs. They were still on him. "You stayed," she whispered. Rowan's smirk faded. He looked at the cuffs, then at her. "I told you, my car is in the shop." Nyra laughed. It was a ragged sound, but it was real. She leaned back against the seat, her shoulder brushing his. They were criminals. They were fugitives. But as the bus sped toward the city, Nyra knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. Nyra stared at her phone screen, the cracked glass illuminating the dread on her face. Mom calling. The bus was pulling into the city limits, the skyline a jagged row of teeth against the dawn. She shouldn't answer. She was a fugitive with a werewolf handcuffed to the seat next to her, but old habits died hard. "Hello?" she whispered. "Nyra." Her mother's voice was shrill. "Where are you? The anniversary party starts in 4 hours. You promised you'd be here, and you promised to bring him." The lie. The boyfriend Nyra had invented to get her mother off her back about being married to the job. She looked at Rowan. He was picking lint off his borrowed flannel shirt, looking bored and dangerous. "I'm coming," Nyra said, her voice tight. "And he's coming too." She hung up. The silence that followed was heavy. "Let me guess," Rowan drawled, not even looking at her. "I'm the boyfriend." Nyra flushed. "My mother is intense. If I show up alone, she'll ask questions I can't answer, like why I'm covered in dirt or why I don't have a patrol car." "So you want me to play house?" Rowan turned to her. His golden eyes danced with amusement. "I'm an alpha king, Nyra. I don't do small talk." "You do if you want me to take these cuffs off," she countered. She held up the key. Rowan's gaze dropped to the key. Then it drifted up to her lips. The air thickened. "Fine," he said. "But I have conditions. First, we get rid of these rags. A king doesn't wear polyester. Second, no cuffs at the party. You have to trust me." Nyra hesitated. Trusting him was madness. He could kill everyone at the party. He could run. Yet, when she looked at him, she didn't see a monster. She saw the man who had carried her through the snow. "Deal," she whispered. "But if you try anything, I will shoot you." "You lost your gun, sweetheart," he reminded her. "I'll find a fork," she threatened. Rowan laughed. It was a low, rumbling sound that made her insides melt. "I like a woman who's resourceful. Unlock me. Officer, we have a date." She turned the key. The cuffs clicked open. As the metal fell away, Nyra felt a strange sense of loss. She wasn't his captor anymore. She was his partner in a lie that was feeling more real by the second. He rubbed his wrists and leaned in close. "One more thing," he whispered, his breath hot against her ear. "If I'm your boyfriend, I get to touch you, to sell the lie. Understand?" Nyra nodded, unable to speak. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She told herself it was just a role. But as his hand brushed the small of her back, guiding her off the bus, she knew she was in trouble.
Rowan stood in front of the mirror in the high-end tailor shop, adjusting the silk tie. Nyra had maxed out her credit card for this. The suit was charcoal gray, fitted to hide the sheer density of his muscle, but it couldn't hide the predator underneath. He looked like a civilized man. He felt like a wolf in a cage. "You clean up nice," Nyra said from the doorway. He turned. She was wearing a simple blue dress she'd pulled from her closet at home. It matched the bruise on her cheek. She looked tired, fragile, and utterly beautiful. "Ready to face the lions?" he asked, offering his arm. "It's just my aunts and uncles," she mumbled, taking his elbow. "They're harmless." Humans are never harmless, Rowan thought. They arrived at the house, a suburban, sprawling thing that smelled of potpourri and judgment. The moment they walked in, The noise hit him. Laughter, clinking glasses, the smell of roasted meat. It was suffocating. Nyra. A woman who looked like an older version of Nyra rushed forward. Her mother. And this must be... Blake? Rowan, he corrected smoothly, flashing a smile that had brought rival packs to their knees. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Vance. He played the part perfectly. He enjoyed it. He charmed the aunts. He listened to the uncles' boring stories about fishing. But every time Nyra tried to drift away, he pulled her back. He kept his hand on her waist, his thumb tracing the curve of her spine. Relax, he whispered into her hair as they stood by the punch bowl. You're stiff as a board. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, she hissed. You're being too... nice. I'm a delight, he smirked. And you smell like you're panicking. I hate lying to them, she admitted. We all lie. Nyra, he said darkly. It's how we survive. The atmosphere shifted. The front door opened. The scent hit him instantly. It wasn't potpourri, it was silver and rot. Rowan stiffened. His hand on her waist tightened to a bruise. Rowan? Nyra looked up, alarmed. What is it? We're not alone, he growled, his voice dropping so low only she could hear. Rogues. Before she could move, the living room windows shattered.
The world shifted from a party to a war zone. Glass exploded inward. Men in tactical gear, wearing the insignia of the 4th Precinct, burst through the doors and windows. They weren't just cops. They moved with the jagged, twitchy speed of shifters on stimulants. Captain Miller walked through the front door. He was holding a shotgun and he was smiling. "Party's over!" Miller shouted. The music died. Screams erupted. Nyra's father dropped his drink. "Miller!" Nyra stepped in front of her family. She didn't have a weapon, so she used her voice. "What the hell are you doing? This is a private residence." "I'm here for a fugitive," Miller said, his eyes sliding to Rowan. "And for the asset." Rowan moved in front of her, a human shield. "Get out, Miller. You have no authority here." "I have the silver warrant," Miller sneered. Miller didn't aim the shotgun at Rowan. He aimed it at Nyra's mother. "Mom!" Nyra screamed. 2 rogue officers grabbed her mother, dragging her toward the door. Her mother didn't scream. She didn't fight. She looked at Nyra, her eyes filled with a terrifying acceptance. "Leave her alone!" Nyra lunged forward. "Don't!" her mother yelled. "Nyra, don't let them take you! Run!" Miller laughed. He pulled a trigger on a sidearm, not a bullet, but a net gun. A heavy mesh, glowing with silver threads, exploded outward. It didn't hit Nyra, it hit Rowan. The silver net wrapped around him, burning into his skin. Rowan roared, falling to his knees. The smell of searing flesh filled the room. "Rowan!" Nyra turned back, torn between her mother and her mate. "Go!" Rowan bellowed, fighting the agony. "Save her!" But it was too late. The rogues dragged her mother out the door. Miller paused on the threshold, looking at Nyra with cold calculation. "You don't even know what you are, do you?" Miller asked. "Your mother isn't just a suburban housewife, Vance. She was the beta of the Silver Pack. She hid her scent to hide you." Nyra froze. The room spun. "What?" "You're the Silver Wolf," Miller said. "And now that we have the mother, the pup will come running." He slammed the door. Nyra stood in the wreckage of her life. Her mother was gone. Rowan was writhing on the floor, smoking under the silver net. Her badge lay on the table, a useless piece of tin. Her chest ached with a pain so deep it felt like her heart was cracking open. She fell to her knees beside Rowan. She tried to pull the net off, but it burned her fingers. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry." Rowan stopped fighting. He looked up at her, his eyes dimming. "Don't be sorry," he rasped. "Get angry." Nyra looked at the door. Her fear evaporated. In its place, something cold and ancient woke up. "I'm going to kill them," she whispered. I'm going to kill them all. The living room smelled of ozone and scorched skin. Nyra knelt in the shattered glass, her knees bleeding, but she couldn't feel the pain. All she could feel was the heat coming from the silver net draped over Rowan. He was groaning, a sound of pure agony that tore through her chest. The silver was sizzling against his skin, burning through the expensive suit, eating into the muscle of the king who had tried to save her mother. "Get back!" Rowan gasped. His voice was a wrecked croak. "It will burn you too." "No," Nyra whispered. She reached out. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, lethal rage. She grabbed the silver mesh. It should have seared her flesh. It should have peeled the skin from her palms. Instead, it just felt warm. A current hummed up her arms, familiar and electric. The silver in her blood wasn't afraid of the metal. It owned it. Time seemed to fracture. She didn't think. She pulled. With a scream of tearing metal, she ripped the net apart. The silver thread snapped like thread. She threw the burning mesh across the room, where it hissed against the wall. Rowan collapsed forward, his breathing ragged. His skin was angry and red, patterned with burns, but he was already healing. Steam rose from his shoulders as the alpha blood went to work. "Nyra," he breathed, looking at her hands. They were untouched. "You didn't burn." "They took her," Nyra said. Her voice was hollow. She looked at the empty doorway where her mother had been dragged out. "Miller took her." "We'll get her back," Rowan rasped. He forced himself to sit up, wincing. "But not like this. Not while you're fighting yourself." Nyra looked down at him. The officer, who cared about protocols and warrants, was dead. She had died the moment Miller threatened her family. "Help me," she begged. She grabbed his shirt, pulling him close until their foreheads touched. "I don't know how to be what I am. I don't know how to use this fire inside me. Teach me, Rowan, please." Rowan's golden eyes locked onto hers. The pain in them vanished, replaced by a fierce, possessive resolve. He reached up and cupped her face. His thumb brushed away a tear that she hadn't realized had fallen. "I won't just teach you," he vowed. "I'll follow you into hell." She helped him stand. They didn't look at the ruin of the house. They didn't look at her terrified relatives huddled in the kitchen. They walked out into the night, leaving the human world behind. The forest was waiting, and so was the war.
The woods behind the subdivision were dense, but they weren't deep enough. Rowan led Nyra further, running until the suburban smells of exhaust and cut grass faded, replaced by the sharp scent of pine and decay. He stopped in a clearing bathed in moonlight. His body still ached from the silver, but the sight of Nyra standing in the snow made him forget the pain. She was radiating heat, literally. The air around her shimmered like steam rising off asphalt. She was a nuclear reactor on the verge of meltdown. "Stop thinking like a cop," Rowan commanded. He stood 10 feet away, giving her space. "You're trying to control it. You're trying to file the power away like it's paperwork. Let it go." "It hurts," Nyra gasped. She was clutching her stomach, doubled over. "It feels like I'm breaking." "You are breaking," Rowan said ruthlessly. "You have to break the human shell to let the wolf out. Stop fighting the pain. Nyra, embrace it." She looked up at him. Her eyes were no longer brown. They were pools of liquid silver, glowing so brightly they lit up the snow around her feet. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," Rowan said, softening his voice. "But I'm right here. I'm your anchor. Look at me." She locked eyes with him. The connection slammed into place, a psychic weight that nearly knocked the wind out of him. He felt her fear. He felt her rage. And then, he felt the surrender. It happened. Nyra screamed. Her back arched. The sound of bones cracking echoed through the trees, loud and wet. It was a violent, terrifying process. Her body contorted, lengthening, shifting. Fur burst through her skin, not the dark brown or black of a common wolf, but a blinding, iridescent silver. Rowan watched in awe. He had lived for a century. He had seen thousands of shifts. He had never seen anything like this. She fell to all fours. The scream turned into a howl. When she stood up, she wasn't Nyra anymore. She was the silver wolf. She was smaller than him, sleek and fast, her fur shining like polished chrome in the moonlight. She shook herself, sending a spray of silver light into the air. Rowan felt a primal instinct force him to his knees. He bowed his head, not out of fear, but out of reverence. She was beautiful. She was lethal. She was his. The silver wolf trotted over to him. She nudged his shoulder with her wet nose. He looked up. Her silver eyes were intelligent, human, and filled with a terrifying clarity. "Let's hunt," her eyes seemed to say. Rowan stood up. He stripped off the ruined suit, shredding the last of his humanity. He shifted, the black wolf rising to meet the silver. He let out a roar that shook the trees. The king and the queen were finally on the board, and Miller was about to realize he had made a fatal mistake.
The world was different through the eyes of the wolf. Colors were muted, sharpened into grays and blues, but the smells were an explosion of information. Nyra could smell the sap in the trees. She could smell the fear of a rabbit a mile away. But most of all, she could smell the rot. It was a trail of decay and cheap cologne. Miller. She ran. Her paws hit the earth with a rhythm that felt like music. She wasn't limping. She wasn't tired. She was a bolt of lightning moving through the trees. Beside her, a massive shadow kept pace. Rowan. The black wolf was a wall of muscle, his stride long and effortless. He didn't lead her. He ran at her flank. He was protecting her blind spot. "Focus," the instinct whispered. She followed the scent trail back toward the city, to the abandoned industrial district near the river. The rot grew stronger. It led to an old steel mill, a rusting skeleton of metal and brick surrounded by a chain-link fence. She slowed, creeping into the shadows of the tree line. Rowan mirrored her movement, lowering his belly to the snow. Through the fence, she saw them. Dozens of rogues patrolling the perimeter. They were armed, some in human form holding rifles, others in wolf form pacing nervously. In the center of the yard, Miller stood by a black van. And there, dragged out onto the concrete, was her mother. Nyra's mother was tied to a chair. She looked battered, but alive. Miller was shouting something at her, pacing back and forth. A growl rose in Nyra's throat. It was a deep, metallic sound that rumbled in her chest. She wanted to charge. She wanted to tear Miller's throat out. Rowan brushed against her side. His warmth grounded her. He looked at her, then at a gap in the fence to the east. Strategy. He was right. If they charged now, they would kill her mother before Nyra could reach her. They needed to be smart. They needed to be the nightmare Miller never saw coming. Nyra looked at the fence. Then she looked at the sky. Clouds were covering the moon. Darkness was falling. Perfect, she thought. She looked at Rowan. She didn't need words. The bond between them was a live wire. You take the left, I take the right. Rowan bared his teeth, a silent promise of violence. The breeze turned, carrying their scent away from the guards. Nyra crouched, her muscles coiled like steel springs. She wasn't Officer Vance anymore. She wasn't a daughter. She was the retribution they had invited to their door. She launched herself into the dark. The final hunt had begun. The steel mill exploded into chaos. Rowan hit the west gate like a wrecking ball, snapping the chain-link fence and drawing every gun and eye toward his massive black form. The rogues opened fire. Bullets sparked against the metal beams. But Rowan was a shadow, moving too fast to hit, tearing through the guards with a brutality that shook the ground. Now. In a blur of motion, Nyra broke from the tree line. She was a streak of quicksilver in the dark. She didn't run. She flowed. The tremor in her blood wasn't a hum anymore. It was a song. She cleared the perimeter fence in a single bound, landing silently on the concrete behind the line of shooters. One rogue turned, his eyes widening. He raised his rifle. Nyra didn't slow down. She slammed into him. The impact shattered his ribs. She didn't stop to kill him. She left him broken and kept moving. Her target was the center of the yard. Miller. Miller was shouting orders, trying to drag her mother toward the waiting van. He had a silver-plated Desert Eagle in one hand and a fistful of her mother's hair in the other. "Get them!" Miller screamed. "Kill the beast!" Nyra let out a howl. It wasn't just sound. It was a weapon. The high-pitched frequency shattered the windows of the van. The rogues, clutching their ears, fell to their knees. Miller spun around, and for the first time, he saw her. Not the rookie cop. The silver wolf. He raised the gun. He fired. The bullet hit her shoulder. It burned like acid, but Nyra didn't falter. The pain only sharpened her focus. She lunged. She hit Miller's chest with the force of a freight train, knocking the wind out of him and sending the gun skittering across the pavement. They tumbled across the asphalt. Miller shifted, his skin ripping as he tried to turn into a gray wolf, but Nyra didn't let him. She pinned him down, her silver paws pressing into his chest. She snarled in his face, her saliva dripping onto his cheek. "Do it!" Miller wheezed, his eyes filled with terror. "Kill me, you mutt!" Nyra hesitated. The cop in her wanted to read him his rights. The wolf wanted to rip his throat out. Rowan appeared. He had finished the guards. He stood over them, blood dripping from his black fur, watching her. He didn't intervene. He was letting her choose. Nyra looked at her mother, who was weeping but safe near the van. Then she looked back at Miller. She didn't kill him. She leaned down and bit his leg, hard enough to sever the tendon, hard enough to ensure he would never walk or run again. She stepped back. She shifted, bones cracking as she returned to human form. She stood naked and bloody in the cold night air, chest heaving. She picked up Miller's gun. "You're under arrest, Captain," she whispered, her voice raspy. "For the attempted murder of a queen." Miller screamed in agony, but the sound was drowned out by the sirens wailing in the distance. The real police were coming. But Nyra didn't care. She turned to Rowan. The war was over.
The silence that followed the violence was heavy, broken only by the whimpers of the wounded rogues and the distant sirens. Rowan shifted back. It was a brutal transition, exhaustion clawing at his muscles. But he didn't care. He grabbed a tarp from the back of the van and walked toward Nyra. She was standing over Miller, trembling. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. Her shoulder was bleeding where the silver bullet had grazed her, but the wound was already closing, knitting together with a faint silvery glow. "Nyra," he said softly. She turned. Her eyes were still wild, half silver, half brown. She looked at him like she didn't know him. Then, recognition flooded back. "Mom," she choked out. "She's safe," Rowan promised. He wrapped the tarp around her shoulders, pulling her into his chest. She collapsed against him, her legs giving out. He held her up, burying his face in her hair. She smelled of copper and ozone, the scent of a storm that had finally broken. "You didn't kill him," Rowan murmured into her ear. "He deserves to rot in a cell," she whispered, her voice muffled against his skin. "Death is too easy." Rowan looked at Miller writhing on the ground. Nyra was right. The humiliation of being taken down by the rookie he despised was a worse punishment than death. Nyra's mother limped over. She looked terrified, but when she saw Rowan holding her daughter, her expression softened. She bowed her head slightly, a gesture of submission to an alpha. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking. Rowan nodded. "Get her to the medics. I'll deal with the pack." "I'm not leaving you," Nyra mumbled, clinging to his arm. "I'm not going anywhere," Rowan said. He lifted her chin, forcing her to look at him. "The warrant is clear, remember? You have to transport the prisoner." Nyra let out a wet, broken laugh. "The car is gone." "Then we walk." Rowan said. Rowan felt the shift in the air. The surviving rogues, the ones who hadn't fled, were crawling out of the shadows. They weren't attacking. They were lowering their bellies to the ground. They had seen the silver wolf. They had seen the Black King. Rowan looked at them, then at Nyra. "They aren't bowing to me," he whispered, a fierce pride swelling in his chest. "They're bowing to you." Nyra looked around. Dozens of wolves were submitting. She straightened her spine, wincing slightly, but standing tall. She wasn't an officer anymore. She was something far more dangerous, and Rowan knew, with absolute certainty, that he would spend the rest of his life making sure she kept that crown.
3 days later, the sunset over the den was a masterpiece of purple and gold. Nyra stood on the balcony of Rowan's private quarters, wearing one of his shirts that hung to her knees. Her badge, bent and scratched, sat on the railing. Next to it lay the broken pair of handcuffs. She picked up the badge. It felt light, meaningless. Thinking of going back? Rowan's voice came from the doorway. He walked out, holding 2 glasses of amber liquid. He looked different in the daylight, less like a monster, more like a man who had finally found peace. But the scar on his neck from the silver net was a reminder of what he had endured for her. "No," Nyra said. She tossed the badge over the railing. It tumbled down into the forest below, lost in the shadows. "I think I'm done with rules." Rowan stepped up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his solid chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder. "That's a shame. I kind of liked the handcuffs." Nyra laughed, a sound that felt free. "Be careful, King Rowan, or I might find a new pair." "Is that a threat?" he purred, nipping gently at her ear. "It's a promise," she replied, leaning into him. A comfortable silence settled between them. The air was cool, but Nyra felt warm. The energy in her bones was still there, but it wasn't chaotic anymore. It was a steady thrum, syncing perfectly with the beat of Rowan's heart against her back. "My mother is safe," Nyra said softly. "The precinct is under investigation. Miller is in the prison hospital. And the silver wolf is home," Rowan added. He turned her around in his arms. His golden eyes searched her face. "You know what this means, Nyra. You're not just my mate. You're the alpha female. These wolves, they're your pack now." "I know," she said. She reached up, tracing the line of his jaw. "I'm not afraid anymore, Rowan. I used to think the law was the only thing that kept the world from falling apart. But I was wrong." "Yeah?" He leaned down, his lips inches from hers. "What holds it together?" "Us," she whispered. As the sky darkened, Rowan kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of desperation or survival. It was a kiss of belonging. It tasted of whiskey and wildflowers. The bond between them flared, bright and unbreakable. Nyra Vance had started this journey trying to arrest a king. She ended it by ruling beside him. She pulled back, breathless. She picked up the broken handcuffs from the railing and dangled them from her finger. "You know," she said, a mischievous glint in her silver eyes, "technically, you're still my prisoner." Rowan grinned, his teeth sharp, his love fierce. "And she let it happen," he quoted, lifting her into his arms. "I'm serving a life sentence, Nyra, and I have no intention of escaping." He carried her inside, and the balcony doors clicked shut, leaving the forest to its new rulers.